Well, a very good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode here on the Life Signatures Radio. I'm so glad that you've found some time, maybe your 10 minutes, your 15 minutes to dedicate to this particular podcast. If you've done that, probably it's because you are interested in the messages that are focused on the subjects of purpose, productivity, and resilience. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, teaching, and instruction, that is what you'll find there. Now, listen, we have been doing this series since the episode of 1912. And thankfully, we are now in the throes of winding it up. If this podcast, by the way, makes any sense to you and it inspires you in one way or another, it just means one thing, that it can also inspire somebody else. Let me tell you something that just came to me as I was thinking about this. Sometimes we overlook things. Sometimes we, undervalue things. But I'm just telling you that if your heart has been moved, or if your heart is going to be moved by anything I say, do make a point to share it with somebody else. It is an indication that someone else can also benefit from it. And if it doesn't, well, I don't think you'll have stayed that long enough if it doesn't make sense to you. We're in the middle of a series. We're talking about personal blockades, standing on our own way of succeeding. Maybe we've believed some things that are not necessarily true, but we believe them and taken them as if they are true. And in so doing, we have limited ourselves from succeeding. So we're asking ourselves, what are the signs that I have a blockade operating in my life? What could be the signs? That's what we're discussing in this episode. So stay tuned.
Welcome to the Life Signatures podcast with Lawrence Namale. Lawrence is a life coach, author, and keynote speaker who loves to tackle different topics on purpose, productivity, and resilience. His mission in life is to awaken all your boundless possibilities available in you. Life Signatures podcast is dedicated to bring to reality every single person who knows that deep down in their gut, there's got to be more to life than this. And now, here is your host, Lawrence Namale.
So in order to understand where we've come from, let us just take a small look at what we've been discussing in a small recap. Number one, we talked about mental blockades. Number two, we talked about spiritual blockades. Number three, we did talk about cultural blockades. And number four, we talked about self-concept blockade. And then number five, we ended by speaking about experiences blockade. These are the areas in which we find blockades being erected unconsciously, and they operate in our lives, limiting us from becoming the best versions of ourselves and limiting us from becoming successful even if we did want. And sometimes we say that this can be happening below the surface. We have no idea it's going on, but we are already limited. And we are participating in that particular bondage, that particular blockade, that particular limitation. So it's up to us to find out where exactly could I be limited. And then we find a way of getting a remedy. And that's what I've been discussing in the episodes in this series, in this mini-series, even as we're coming to a close of the whole thing. We say that the first sign, if you wanted to know that you are under a blockade, you could be under a blockade, because these are signs. They're not the sure thing. These are signs. If you are a stickler for culture, this is the way that things have been done, or things should be done. This is the way it's always been done. Now, I know there's a difference, because there's some people who have a personality profile of loyalty and cautiousness, where they basically, they're, I'm going to discuss that today, risk averse of sorts, and they don't want to change stuff and so on and so forth. But if you're a stickler for the culture of the day without wanting to introduce or to entertain any change, there is a big chance that you could be under a blockade, or a blockade could be operating in your life. Secondly, you have no goals in your life. No vision, no mission, no goals. It is another indication that there could be a blockade operating in your life, because again, we cannot fulfill our God-given potential. We cannot get to the very best apex of our calling if we have no goal, no vision, no values. Number 3, we talked about this. If you have no purpose, if you have, you do not know why you're existing in the very first place, you're just there. I can't say you have no purpose. You do have purpose, but you haven't discovered what it is. You don't have a semblance of what that particular thing could be. You might be under a serious blockade. And then number 4, we talked about you have absolutely no accountability. There is no accountability in your life. There is no responsibility. If you don't have accountability, first of all, we talked about this, first of all, to yourself. Accounting for your time, accounting for your talent, accounting for your treasures. If you don't have an accountability for this, maybe on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, if you don't have a tracking mechanism of how you're being productive in this life, you will know where you're weak. You will know where you're veering off target. You will know where you're failing. I told you the story of Elon Musk and the guy that they were working with at Tesla. They fired the guy because he had no accountability of how much he was spending in building the car initially. He didn't know. He was just saying that it's probably going to cost us $100,000 or $80,000 to build a Roadster. He didn't know that he was running to $140K because there was no accountability. But the fifth thing that I talked about yesterday is chronic complaining. You're a chronic complainer. If you find yourself, by the way, if you found people who are chronic complainers, you know what? Those guys could be under a blockade because they seldom do work. You'll hardly find someone who is working, who is getting feedback, complaining about stuff. They'd rather change the stuff, or they'd rather change themselves. So chronic complainers could be people who are under a serious blockade. But let's talk about something today. Maybe you can talk about risk averse tomorrow. Number 6. You know that there could be some element of a blockade operating in your life if there is apathy. You have apathy. And let me just say this, that apathy is the sorriest thing you ever saw on the crown of creation. You know what the crown of creation is? It is the human being. Because apathy is just this state of indifference. It's like a person who feels they have no motivation, basically have no enthusiasm, no emotional connection to whatever it is. To their work or to their life or to their goals or their personal ambition, and yet they're actively involved in doing something. Like a guy who is in charge of a department, but he has apathy. A guy who is in charge of teaching a class, my goodness, but he has apathy towards that particular vocation. Or maybe let me call it profession. Like a guy who is in charge of taking care of his children, but he has apathy about that. It is the most debilitating thing ever. And if at all, apathy is in operation, and sometimes apathy can be, in a fleeting moment of time, fleeting period of time, fleeting season. But if you find that this is something that is just there, sometimes apathy can be brought about by different things. Totally different things in your life. It could be a season you're going through. It could be maybe you are tired. Honestly, you just bored, tired because you've never refreshed yourself. You're looking at the same thing day in, day out, and you've never taken a break. It could create some level of apathy. Maybe you've tried over and over again and there's basically no breakthrough. It could create apathy. Maybe you've postponed or procrastinated very many times and, it could create apathy. And every time where there is apathy, there is no motivation. There's loss of motivation. There's loss of drive. There is procrastination. There is stagnation. There is diminished resilience. In other words, if a blow comes, a setback comes, you just lay back and accept the blow. You don't fight back. You don't want to bounce back. Why? Apathy does exist. There is basically no growth. There is impaired relationships and so on and so forth. If we are going to understand this, then we will know that every place where there is apathy, there is a blockade that is limiting us from growing, limiting us from succeeding, limiting us from becoming the best versions of ourselves. And we've got to recognize apathy as a potential obstacle as the first step. I had this apathy some years back. I think I've shared with you on this podcast very many times. When I was working in my very first job, I outgrew that job after 7 months, I could guess. 7 months, I outgrew that job. There was basically nothing else that I could be able to do. I knew in my spirit that I was out of that place. Actually, I knew that I was better off. I was meant for better things than to be in that place. And it's amazing because that is the place I was dreaming to work. When I was jobless, I was dreaming to work at that particular place, and it came to pass. But after 7 months down the line, I got fed up. I learned everything there is to learn. There was basically no challenge. And then apathy set in. I used to curse that place and then go there to work. I was the angriest, the saddest, the most long-faced person you'd ever meet working in that particular place. And I knew I needed to leave. To counter apathy, we need to understand where it's coming from. And we need to start arresting it, because if we don't, it grows. But this apathy, like I already hinted to you some time back, it normally is a culmination of something. It's something else matures, and that's where apathy comes from. It is the sorriest thing you'll ever see in a human being. If generally you lack interest, you lack passion, you lack enthusiasm for anything in life, there is a very serious blockade operating in your life, I'm sorry to say. And generally the nature of a human is to be engaged, to be active, to be committed, to be dedicated to a particular cause. That's how our hearts operate. That's how our life, our psyche operates. And if we are not, our existence on the earth is not just for survival. Neither is it for success alone. Our existence on the face of the earth is primarily for the sake of significance. That means that we are engaged in making a difference and transformation and contribution and impact on the face of the earth. And therefore, if there is any sign of these things not happening, our disconnect from these things, it is a sure indication that there could be a blockade in our lives, an insidious blockade that is going to block us from succeeding, limit us from succeeding. So we've got to get it covered. Tomorrow we are going to look at the second last one. But until then, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Life Signatures Radio. If you enjoyed today's show, subscribe to Life Signatures Radio on iTunes, Stitcher, or visit our website at lifesignatures.libsyn.com. Life Signatures Radio, fresh, clean, and inspiring.